An audience member of Reforge's stream made a statement, and Reforge claimed that their statement was logically sound. Now, I'm curious to hear what is being concluded here. I'm not going to listen to all 11 minutes. I don't know. It may be interesting enough, but I think a few things were said here that we probably need to go ahead and examine, because the conversation about Astrobot selling 1.5 billion, 2 million units, and whether or not that being impressive is a very interesting one that needs to be, I would say, tempered with what I think is a little bit of context when it comes down to it. So let's go ahead and take a listen here.
1.5 out of 75 million is not good. Yeah, I know 187, and that means every single game that launches on Steam is an abysmal failure. Your argument is, with all due respect, 187, that argument is so stupid and so ignorant. When you claim Astrobot selling 1.5 million out of 75 million, which, by the way, it's probably higher than that by now, so that number is going to keep climbing, interestingly enough. But you just called every game that launches on Steam an abysmal failure. Do
you know where this argument is going? This argument is going exactly here. Let me show you where the argument is going. Because when you make this argument, or at least when you say this and say, well, you know, what do you have to say about the fact that this game sold, you know, so little on PlayStation or Xbox or Nintendo? People will point and say, well, if you look at Steam, Steam has, you know, tens and tens and tens of millions of users. Therefore, if a game launches on Steam, this should guarantee the game having a good amount of sales, right? Then what? And then when you say, well, no, and then they say, well, why do you then expect that a game like Astrobot should have similar amount, you know, a high number of sales on PlayStation? Now, it's a very good counter to that argument. However, here's where the problem is. It was PlayStation players that swore that their exclusives are so full of quality that they sell. But the data has actually come now to pounce on everybody for us to realize that that was clearly not accurate. That the so-called PlayStation fans, fanboys, talking heads, and I'm not saying Reforge said anything, I'm just talking about the ones that I know, were always claiming that their games were quality. Their games were the best of games, and saying all this stuff. So people are asking and saying, okay, if your games are such quality games, then why are they not selling? Now, here's another thing, too. He goes ahead and makes a very interesting argument. Listen to it, and I'll counter it because, again, it's one that the PlayStation player has boxed themselves in. The PlayStation fanboy, hyper fanboy, has boxed themselves in.
Quite literally the most brain-dead argument that people make. You declared every game a failure with that logic. It's inconsistent, it's cherry-picked, and it's only ever used against PlayStation. You'd never say that about Nintendo games. 150 million market saturation of the Nintendo Switch. You would never use saturation of the sales of a Nintendo game on that platform. You'd be like, yeah, it failed.
Here's the thing. PlayStation fans, they boxed themselves into a corner and said that their exclusives were somewhat pushing consoles and doing all this stuff. In the case of Nintendo, their exclusives actually sell at a higher proportion solely on that platform than PlayStation's games. When we looked at a chart a few years ago that was actually put up based on some numbers that we saw that Nintendo has, for Mario Kart Deluxe 8, even with bundles and all of the above, had sold about 78 million units. There is no PlayStation game that we know of that has sold that much in the PS4 days, even though that was also another console that sold that much. So people actually do have grounds and a right to ask and say, how about these PlayStation games? Why are they not doing like the Nintendo games are? So this is where that's coming from. So when you put it in context, what happens is everybody now has to come to the table and sit down and admit that these PlayStation games do not operate in terms of their exclusivity like Nintendo games, simply because the market saturation in the PlayStation and Xbox land is very, very different. They're facing stiff competition from third-party partners. This is a point and a case that I've made over many, many months. All these people that were coming and saying exclusives matter and blah, 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 blah. This was the argument that basically went ahead and pretty much debunked a lot of their narratives. So him basically trying to take this stance has to also admit that in the past, PlayStation players overly claimed how well these exclusives did and how many consoles they sold and all this stuff. But now that whole house of cards has fallen apart.
You'd never do that with a game launching on Steam, only selling to a fraction of the Steam user base. Do you want to know why you'd never use that logic anywhere else? Because it's not driven by facts, logic, reason, or intelligence. It's driven by fandom.
No. It's driven by a reality to actually put everybody in a reality check, especially the so-called hyper PlayStation fans who had claimed in the past that their exclusives were these, big, huge box pushers. Only to find out that after the box has been pushed, everybody went back to business. That's what happened. And so it's like, okay, so it's not really because people were so enamored by your exclusives. It's just simply that, they just bought a popular console to play more popular games than your so-called exclusives. That's what it was. It pretty much puts the PlayStation exclusive in its humble basket that it needed to be in. That's all it is. There's no need to get all riled up, but I think he gets riled up here.
It's driven by ideology. It's driven by grifters and haters. It's illogical. It doesn't make any sense. As soon as you apply the logic to Steam or Nintendo or multiplats that land on Xbox, Steam, and PlayStation and Nintendo, you look like an absolute buffoon.
No. Let's go ahead and look at this. Nintendo sales versus PlayStation sales. And look at exclusives and there's a chart that's out there in Google in Images. There it is. So this is one that somebody did before. Best-selling Nintendo games versus best-selling PlayStation games. And so we have to go ahead and correct this. I understand he's a little riled up, but, you can't get riled up and not, talk about the data. So first of all, when you think about Nintendo Switch and its top sellers, at the time that this was put together, Nintendo had 57 million units of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe sold. The only place you can buy this Mario Kart 8 Deluxe game is on the Nintendo Switch. However, for a game to come close, even to the number, what is this? This is number 7 seller at the time, Pokemon Scarlet, / Violet. It had to go on PC, meaning that even much more of the burden of trying to prove that these PlayStation exclusives are going to do so well, it falls more on the PlayStation player to explain why the PC piece needs to be there to push the game to such a high number in terms of sales. Does that make sense? Anyways, just keep going.
Do it with Hogwarts Legacy. Hogwarts Legacy was available on Steam, the entire Steam user base, the entire next-gen user base, the entire old-gen user base, and 150 million Nintendo Switches. Hogwarts Legacy was an embarrassing commercial failure according to your absolutely dumb, busted, no sense to it at all logic.
No. Hogwarts Legacy is a third-party game and doesn't claim to be a game that is exclusive in some sense, right? In fact, if anything, do you all remember that PlayStation actually did co-opt a piece of the game to make it exclusive to its console because it wanted to position itself as selling the much superior version of the game. A lot of gamers ignored that and they played the game where they wanted. It was a one-year shop or something of that nature. But a third-party game doesn't feel the need to pretend to be Nintendo. This is my argument, is that PlayStation is cosplaying, and a console that actually is moved by its exclusives. That's not the reality. I mean, if you look at God of War on the 2018, the one that's on this list, this is an old list, by the way. This is like a super outdated list. But still, I'm just kind of showing you the, comparisons here using these. But if you look at the numbers, you can see that you have to go all the way back to, the PS2 days to even find a game around 15 million units. Now, yeah, some games would have risen to the top. Like Marvel Spider-Man 2 would have come up top here, and God of War Ragnarok would have probably moved and probably maybe pushed Uncharted out of the way. I don't know. But, I mean, none of them are still touching, even Animal Crossing numbers. We haven't seen any of them touch Super Smash Bros., of which Super Smash Bros. Would have probably sold more. and Breath of the Wild. None of them is touching Breath of the Wild. At this time, I think, Tears of the Kingdom newly just came out. So when you look at the data, you can see that, yeah, and we're talking about exclusives. We're not talking about third-party games here. So therefore, he's making a sound claim against anybody using that logic, but he's missing the context of which people go ahead and question Astrobot sales and other PlayStation exclusive sales. So he'd first have to divest of that notion that PlayStation exclusives actually do, matter or are meaningful, right? So once he divests of that, then he can make this argument, and we'll be like, yeah. But until then, this feels like a deflection.
You will never say this about other games. You will never do it.
Because they're not exclusives. They're not claiming to be exclusive.
Because you would look really dumb. And let me tell you something. You do look really dumb when you make the argument about Astrobot. It only gets traction because people shut their critical thinking off and they think like a fanboy.
No, nobody does that. Well, I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, we're looking at the numbers here and we're saying, in fact, okay, let's go ahead and shut the argument down. Compared to the other PlayStation exclusives, what happened to Astrobot? Compared to the other top-selling PlayStation exclusives, what happened to Astrobot? Remove the Nintendo list, okay? Let's just say Nintendo list didn't exist. All right? Let's just do that one. Let's just say there's no Nintendo list. Let's do it this way. So compared to the other exclusives on PlayStation, what happened to Astrobot? I guess that's also another way to ask the question, and then you can say, well, it appears the market has changed, so these PlayStation exclusives don't seem to be hitting as much anymore. Or Astrobot is not a game that's suited for majority of the PlayStation audience, like, say, God of War or whatever. But again, God of War, Spider-Man, and the ones that are big, they have a lot of, brand recognition. But Astrobot being a new game probably shows that PlayStation is more than likely not in a comfortable place to take risks. I don't know. There are many answers that could be given, but it still presents many different fundamental problems.
And they're like, yep, haha, Astrobot failed. According to your mathematical logic, Hogwarts Legacy failed as well.
No. In fact, if you say according to his logic, you'd have to go ahead and get a calculator out in order for you to be able to, kind of feel that that's not the case. Then let me go ahead and, you know what? At first, I wanted to see some reason, but again, this is what rants do. Rants make you start talking, and then now error is not far from you. Hogwarts Legacy sold about 25 million units, right? And it launched on PlayStation, right? And he said, it was available on blah, 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 blah. I don't care. It launched on PlayStation. They just call it PlayStation, PS4, and PS5s, right? Because God of War Ragnarok and Horizon Forbidden West did the same thing. It launched on Xbox, it launched on Steam, and then it launched on Nintendo. So 4 platforms. Divided by 4 platforms, that's still 6.2 million. Let's say they all were sold equally, right? It still beat Astrobot on each individual platform if we went by that, even though, yes, there will probably have been some discrepancy as to what platforms, it would have sold more on. But even when we compare and say, well, it's sold on each individual platform, right? What would have been the average overall? It still kicks Astrobot's butt at the end of the day. And keep in mind that it actually did sell about this much in the 1 year that it launched, right? Or for those people who are making fun of, third-party exclusivity, yabba dabba do. Well, okay, how about we take a game like Black Myth Wukong that only sold on Steam and PlayStation and Epic Games. So PC, PlayStation, or whatever it is. Let's just call it all that, right? And if we even did that comparison, it'd be much worse. So there's just no way. This is one of those arguments where, like I said, and this is why I tell people not to take hard stances. You box yourself into a corner very easily.
It did. It sold to a fraction of a gigantic potential audience.
You are correct. It did sell to a fraction. However, none of these games claimed to be the system pusher or the game changer. You know what I mean? Compared to, and nobody was claiming that these games were going to basically change their lives like some PlayStation fans and hyper fans do with PlayStation games. Not saying you did it, Reforge. I don't know what you said about most of them. Oh, wait, hold on. Did you just not say you haven't played a game as quality as a PlayStation game in another clip that they put out there? And somebody replied and said Elden Ring. Oh, yeah. So you have said that. Okay, yeah. If you didn't say that, then people will probably not be asking these questions.
It's a fraction of the audience.
All right, we're done here, man. There really is nothing to go ahead and say. This is probably another one of those other rants that you're probably going to hear, and it's not going to serve any purpose. Oh, man, this is so crazy. I think what's going to go ahead and kind of transform the conversation is once we start to see a lot of the, talking heads address things from the perspective of wanting to, just being a lot more objective. If they want to go ahead and implement a little bit of objectivity and, look at more context and not feel combative every time, I think it's going to help a lot. But these are just my thoughts. Thanks for watching the video. Talk to me in the comment section, guys. Peace out.